Okay, what's up, YouTube? This is J-Man Time, and today I have another rare World War II weapon for you guys today. Now, today's weapon comes all the way from Germany, and it is known as the Sturmkampfgewehr StKG. The Sturmkampfgewehr was a German modification of the Carbiner 98 carbine into a repeating grenade launcher. Now, this weapon was one of the, better prototype weapons designed by the Germans that was never mass produced, or at least not issued on every level of the Wehrmacht in the Waffen-SS. This weapon was a break action grenade launcher, and it used one of the coolest types of ammunition. This weapon was a 26.5 millimeter weapon, or fired a 26.5 millimeter standard grenade cartridge. This grenade cartridge was known as the 26 millimeter Wurf Granat Patron 526, and this was basically a contained grenade shell. This was basically like a miniature grenade contained within a shell, just like you would have in a modern grenade launcher. This weapon also used two other types of ammunition. It could also use a Stahlhelm light grenade round called the Wolfkropper 326 LP. The 326 LP was literally just a Stahlhelm grenade redesigned to be fired from a rifle grenade launcher, but it could also be fired from this weapon, the Sturmkampfgewehr. The other type of ammunition this weapon used was a shape-charged armored piercing round, very similar to the Panzerfaust, or literally just a miniaturized Panzerfaust round known as the Panzer Wolfkropper LP42. The LP42 had the ability to penetrate at least 50 millimeters of armor, with some sources stating that it could penetrate upwards to 76 millimeters of armor. Now, this weapon was basically meant to increase the stopping power of the average German soldier during the Second World War. Now, keep in mind, during the war, the Germans did invent weapons that pretty much had the same role as this weapon. I mean, you had the Sturmpistole, which could do basically the same thing as this gun. It could also fire a similar cartridge, and it could also use the Panzer Wolfkropper L42 anti-tank round, and it could also fire those Stahlhelm type LP326 rounds. Later on, you also had the Panzerfaust, or before the Sturmpistole, you had the Panzerfaust Kielin 30 through Panzerfaust 100 series. The Panzerfaust series of anti-tank weapons could destroy just about any Allied tank, or any Allied tank. The Panzerfaust could pierce between 100 to 320 millimeters of armor, which was more armor than any Allied tank had during the war. So this weapon kind of was, it wasn't really 100% outclassed by any singular weapon, but it was outclassed by individual weapons. But this weapon, the Sturmkampfgewehr, was a useful weapon that was not mass-produced. This weapon was designed to increase the stopping power of the average infantry soldier. For example, on the Eastern Front, the average German soldier, they had the stopping power to kill basically infinite amounts of Soviet soldiers, but they didn't have enough explosive power, at least in terms of close-range weapons. They had their mortars and their Panzerfaust, but they needed something that was, repeating. The problem with the Panzerfaust is that once you fire it, it's basically gone. Once you fired that Panzerfaust round, it was basically it. The Panzerfaust was just a one-shot, one-hit weapon. You only needed one shot to destroy a tank, but if you're fighting hordes of tanks, or if you're fighting hordes of tanks, you're going to need more than one shot. And the Panzer Wolfkropper LP42 round would have given you more ammunition with a weapon like the Sturmkampfgewehr, which is a repeating weapon. So it doesn't 100% outclass the Panzerfaust in terms of armor penetration, but it outclasses the Panzerfaust in terms of its reusability, which is what the average German soldier needed on both the Eastern and Western fronts. The Sturmkampfgewehr's origin is pretty murky. Some of these weapons have markings that date all the way back to 1938, while most of them seem to have been produced between 1943 and 1944. So if this weapon was designed in 1938, then it would make it a pre-World War II weapon. But some experts say that the ones that are marked not model 1938, were just the markings on the original carabiner before it was converted into a Sturmkampfgewehr. But this information is pretty murky, as there is not much information that has survived from the German Reich. Remember, when the war was coming to an end, when World War II was coming towards the end, many records were actually burned by the Germans. So that includes some information on weapons and weapon development. It's believed that the information on this weapon was also destroyed, which is why it is hard to pinpoint the exact year in which this weapon was developed. This weapon seems to have been developed either for the Wehrmacht or the Waffen-SS, with some experts stating that the weapon could have been developed for the Volkssturm or the Peoplessturm, which was a last-ditch political militia slash semi-volunteer army put together by the German government towards the last year and a half of the war, even though the Volkssturm technically pre-existed the war, as the Volkssturm originally came into existence in around 1936, but it didn't become a full-fledged army unit until about 1943 and 1944, when the threat of the Soviet Union became more clear as the Russians were nearing the German border post-Stalingrad. This weapon, the Sturmkampfgewehr, is one of the cooler weapons designed by the Germans. This weapon also used the same round from the Sturmpistole. This weapon also used the same anti-tank round from the Sturmpistole, the Panzer Wolfkropper LP-42. The LP-42 was like a miniature version of the Panzerfaust round. The Panzerfaust was a German recoilless gun, or single-shot recoilless gun, that was developed in 1942 and 1943 also. Except that weapon was much larger and it could pierce more armor. The Panzer Wolfkropper 42 cartridge could punch through at least 50 millimeters of armor, which was good enough to destroy most Soviet tanks on the Eastern Front, at least in 1943-1944, before heavier Russian tanks like the IS-3 came out, which made it much difficult to destroy these types of tanks. But on the Western Front, the Sturmkampfgewehr's LP-42 cartridge would have been pretty useful against Western Allied tanks. For example, the M3 Stuart or the M5 Stuart series of light tanks, the M4 Sherman, and a bunch of other British and Canadian tanks that were pretty easy to pierce with this medium-sized anti-tank cartridge. One of the main complaints I have with the Sturmkampfgewehr is that it was never mass-produced. I mean, it's estimated that only about maybe 1,000 to 2,000 of these were ever really issued towards the end of the war. Most of these weapons were either destroyed or lost to history. Only a few dozen actually survived worldwide. If the Germans had mass-produced this weapon, it probably would have made tank killing much easier for the German infantry on both the Eastern and Western fronts. But the Germans went with the Panzerfaust, which was a good weapon, but it was not a reusable weapon. That is the problem with the Panzerfaust. It's a one-shot. Once you fire that Panzerfaust, it's basically gone. This weapon, on the other hand, was a repeating weapon, and if the LP-42 anti-tank shape charge cartridge was used with this weapon, if it had been mass-produced with the LP shape charge Panzerfaust type warhead, if this had been issued to most of the infantry on both the eastern and western fronts, it would have made it much, much easier to kill enemy tanks. The average soldier would have the ability to knock out a T-34 or a Sherman tank with that LP-42 cartridge. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. But just imagine what if it did. The tank casualties on both sides, on both fronts, for the Allied side would have been much, much higher. And keep in mind, one of the main problems the Germans had was the overwhelming force or overwhelming use of enemy tanks. The Germans only had about 20 to 30,000 tanks of their own versus over 100,000 Soviet tanks on the east and another 100,000 Soviet tanks on the Western Front. So this type of weapon, at least in the anti-tank role, would have been very useful. This weapon would have also been useful as an anti-infantry weapon. As I said, it could use the LP-326 round, which is basically just a Stahlhelm grenade designed to be fired from a rifled grenade launcher or a grenade launcher like the Sturmkampfgewehr, a repeating grenade launcher. It would have made it much easier to take out large hordes of enemy troops. Just imagine if the Sturmkampfgewehr had been used on D-Day or during the Battle of Kursk. You know, you would have had higher tank casualties and higher infantry casualties for both the Allied forces at Normandy and the Soviet forces at Kursk. And at Kursk, remember, the Soviets won largely because they had way more tanks than the Germans, and the Germans couldn't keep up with the Germans couldn't keep up with the large number of Soviet infantry as well. So weapons like this could have changed the course of those two battles, the battles of Normandy and the Battle of Kursk, even though the Battle of Kursk happened earlier. So those are my opinions on how the Sturmkampfgewehr StKG could have been used, but remember, it wasn't, and this is one of the rarer weapons designed by the Germans, either towards the end of the war, or if the weapon was designed in 1938 before the war. And if it was designed in 1938, then that would have been, that's kind of even worse, because they had the weapon they needed before the war even begun, but instead they went for the more, expensive weapon. You know, even though the Panzerfaust was a good weapon, you know, it was cheap to produce. Remember, it was just a single shot weapon, whereas this weapon could be used, it's a repeating weapon, and it could be used both as an anti-infantry weapon and as an anti-tank weapon. So that's basically all I have to say for the Sturmkampfgewehr StKG. But what do you all think of this rare German World War II era grenade launcher? Please tell me in the comments section below. And until next time, this was J-Man Time signing off. Oh, and I hope this weapon does appear in the Battlefield 5 game, but I highly doubt that'll happen. I mean, this weapon is super rare, but you know, if DICE can have all those rare weapons from World War I and Battlefield 1, then this weapon might have a chance in appearing in Battlefield 5. But what do you all think? Please tell me in the comments section below. And until next time, this was J-Man Time signing off.